Welcome to Crayon Conversations. This is an opportunity for us to engage with experts in their field, deep dive on their knowledge, and ask our own questions. At Crayon, we're big fans of investing for your child from a young age, even if it's just a small amount. But when it comes to selecting an investment, many parents, and myself included, care about not just the financial returns that our investment could generate, but also where our money is going and how that can shape the world that our children will grow up in. I'm thrilled to introduce Chelsea Traver. Chelsea has worked in the finance industry across the US, the UK, and now New Zealand. Together with her business partner, Mike, Chelsea is the founder of Evergreen Advice, and they bring responsible investing to all investors. Chelsea is a registered investment advisor, a Chartered Financial Analyst, and a certified member of the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia. We are recording this conversation for those who want to catch up on it later, and we'll be providing a transcript afterwards as well. I'll kick into the conversation and we welcome your questions at the end. So Chelsea, can you share how you got into responsible investing and why it's so important to you?
Yeah, so I've worked in the finance industry for about just over 10 years now, but it was really in my last position where I began the dive into the responsible investing rabbit hole. So while I was there, my team was responsible for managing about 500 million for individuals, trusts, and charities. But my specialization was creating and maintaining the responsible investing portfolio. So that really involved deciding what our responsible investment philosophy was, what funds we'd use, and how to explain this all to clients. And of course, this wasn't a solo effort. I collaborated with my manager at the time and my now business partner, Mike. But it was really through this work that I saw how responsible investing could be done well and not so well, which drove me to become a passionate advocate for trying to get it right and improving in the future. For me personally, I also think investing responsibly is important because climate change is one of the greatest issues the world's facing right now. And while investing responsibly isn't going to make the sweeping changes that we need by itself, it is a step in the right direction and it can be part of the pressure on companies to do better.
Okay, thank you. And for those of us who are newer to this area, what's a good starting definition of responsible investing? Because I've seen quite a few floating around.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a tricky one, but I would say a very simple definition of responsible investing is that it seeks to consider both a financial return and a social or environmental good. And it's designed to make positive change. Now, this is the boilerplate definition, but what's tricky about this area is that responsible investing means different things to different people. So, for some people, climate change might be at the top of their list of concerns, whereas for others, it might be animal welfare. But I would say generally, when a fund looks to invest responsibly, they're trying to make positive change as well as have strong financial returns.
Okay, so they've got almost a dual mandate, if you like.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that responsible investments, they do still have that financial return focus. And so it isn't just kind of do good, but you're looking at doing good while getting a financial return.
Okay, I want to come back to returns, but first, the finance industry loves jargon. I think that's something that new investors find really challenging to grapple with. When it comes to responsible investing, there are a lot of different terms that are thrown around. So I'd love for you to run us through the spectrum of impact. And I'm going to bring up a graphic from your website that might help us understand that a bit better. So,
Yeah, it is really tricky. There's a lot of jargon out there, and so it can be confusing, especially because there isn't one definition, one standard definition used by all fund managers. So, like Steph said, we look at it as a spectrum of impact. So, on one side, you have traditional investing, where only financial returns are considered. And then all the way on the other side, you have philanthropy, where no financial return is needed, and it's just all about the impact, all about doing good. So in the middle of that spectrum is where most responsible fund managers sit. The question for people looking to invest responsibly is, where do they want their investments to be in this spectrum? So just to give you an idea of the different options, a term commonly seen when looking at ethical investment options is ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. So if a fund manager says that they use ESG, it means that they consider the environmental, social, and governance issues when making investment decisions. So for example, they might look at what is their resource usage? How do they treat employees? Are there any kind of human rights issues in their supply chains? Now, the key thing to note here is that just because a manager evaluates companies using ESG lens doesn't mean they have to do anything with this information. ESG is a great way of getting a holistic view of a company. And so some managers might say that they evaluate companies on an ESG lens, but they might still be looking at, it doesn't mean they have to do anything about it. It doesn't mean they have to take into account those issues when making their investment calls. And that's why we have ESG next to traditional investing in our responsible investment framework. So if you move more towards the right side, more towards the impact side, are the managers that specifically seek companies that have better environmental or social performance, or even those investments that are targeted at key sustainability areas, let's say clean energy or green property. So overall, it is a personal decision as to where you want your investments to be on that spectrum. And then unfortunately, the next step is you just got to dig in and find out, look into a fund and find out where they sit. You can't just rely on the name to tell you if a fund is actually investing ethically, because a manager might label a fund as sustainable, socially responsible, ethical, but those terms don't necessarily mean anything concrete. And so this framework is a good way to evaluate how ethical a fund actually is.
Okay, so it sounds like it can span the gamut all the way from, we look at these factors, but maybe more from a business analysis perspective. And then you've got folks who don't invest in certain companies, say gaming or tobacco, etc. And then you start to get into some of the more interesting space around specifically seeking out investments that have a positive impact. And so when you look at this, and you touched on financial returns earlier, how has the responsible investment industry performed compared to traditional investing? And do you know if that is different depending on where they sit on this spectrum?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So, in terms of responsible investing, there's been numerous studies that have said it if you were to invest responsibly, you don't necessarily get worse returns. They've generally performed um, uh, equally. And in fact, responsible investing had a slight outperformance. Now, I don't have the most recent numbers because something that you do have to keep in mind when investing ethically is there might be periods where an ethical investment fund performs differently than a traditional investing fund. And this last year is a good example of that, when oil prices went up and traditional investments were doing much better than ethical investments. And that took away some of the outperformance from the last 5 years. Um, I would be cautious about saying investing ethically can get you much better returns, but I think it's fair to say that you don't have to give up returns to invest responsibly.
Okay. And I think that's very exciting to hear. Parents obviously want to do good, but they do want to, be able to provide future opportunities for their children as well.
Yeah, and it's a big decision to making. You're investing for, someone else. It's a big weight on your shoulders, and so you want to make sure you're doing right by them and by the world, and figuring out kind of what that balance is for you.
Mhm. And, you know, some fund managers have been accused of greenwashing or window dressing. So you mentioned earlier that it can be hard to know what a fund is actually doing under the hood. Can you run us through what this is and how, an investor like me at home can kind of see through that and make sure that my money's actually going towards something I care about and not just someone who talks about it?
Yeah, it is a big issue in the ethical investment industry. So, I guess just to start off with, greenwashing means a fund overstates its green features or maybe even mislabels itself as green. So, for example, if a fund were to just exclude tobacco and nuclear weapons, would you consider that a green fund? So, probably not, because that's what most fund managers do these days. Investors are looking for more.
Mhm.
The FMA actually just came out with a report a few months ago on greenwashing and laid out what they expect from fund managers to make sure that consumers are being appropriately treated and informed, because this is a big issue. Um, Investing ethically is a significant business these days, and so investors are understandably concerned that the fund managers are just jumping on the green bandwagon without actually investing in a way that contributes towards sustainability or change. And this is going to be a key theme in this talk, but that's why it's important to do some research to make sure your investments are measuring up to your standards. So check out the areas of concern on the Mindful Money website. So you can plug in your KiwiSaver, you can plug in the funds that you invest in, and it'll show the areas of concern that that fund might have. And you can decide, is that okay with you that your fund invests in these areas or not? But that is, I would say, the first step. So then look at the manager's website to see what reports and information they have available. So, for example, if they say they have a climate change as a key consideration, do they report on their carbon usage against a benchmark? Do they have a clear framework for responsible investing? Are they in the news advocating for change? These are all things that you can search for to make sure that your fund manager is doing what they said they're going to do. Now, finally, um, as a data person, I quite like having external validation. And
Mhm.
so this might be something like a Mindful Money Award or certification by the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia. The common acronym for that is RIA. So these are companies or uh, um, yeah, companies that would review the manager's underlying investments and certify them or award them their designation.
Okay. And what about for people who invest in a stock? Do companies have any obligation to disclose, or where can you find information on that?
Yeah, so I have focused a little bit on funds here, but for companies, it's a little trickier. So the good thing is that there is a framework coming out this in 2023 where large financial organizations are going to have to report on their climate change disclosures. It's called the TCFD. Um, and the other places to look would be to see if a company has a sustainability plan.
Mhm.
What are they reporting? So similar things. Do they have any external validation? For example, if it's a building company, do they have any targets around highly rated uh, new new buildings that they want to make sure are green? Um, and so those are kind of the things you can look at. Again, it does take some research, but it's a good place to start.
Okay. And what are common mistakes you see kind of first time responsible investors make?
Getting bogged down in analysis paralysis.
Right.
Number one thing. And I've been there. I am a detail oriented research kind of person. And so I like numbers and facts and data before I make a decision. It's why I got into this industry because I like that stuff. However, back when I first graduated from university, I was trying to decide like what is my own personal investment strategy. I wasn't working in advice at the time. I was working in another area of finance. And it took me over a year to make a decision. I just debated and debated and debated and was sure there was some perfect option out there if I just searched far enough. But in the end, I just went with the best fit option.
Mhm.
But looking back, I gave up so much time in the market that my funds could have been invested because I was just going in circles. Like, of course, I'm not recommending that you do no research. I think you can tell from my talk so far that is not going to be what I'm recommending. But instead, decide what's important to you and choose the best option from what's available, and then just just do it. Like, you got to pull the trigger at some point. And so even if you don't necessarily have a perfect option, um, you getting started slowly but surely can be a nice way to look at it.
Mhm.
Um, I think another point is that you don't have to do this alone. Of course, there's traditional advice where an advice manager manages your funds, but some advisors also offer a self-managed investment plan where they review your situation and make recommendations that you would then implement and manage yourself. So I mention this just because some people like a second opinion, especially in this rather confusing industry. And then the final point is for those that are considering investing for the first time, my top tips are first, make sure you have an emergency fund, make sure you've paid off your high interest debt, decide what fund and what provider you want to go with, including looking at their sustainability characteristics. And then finally, just start. You got this.
Okay. And how has the responsible investment industry changed over the years, and where do you think it's going in the future?
It's evolved a lot. It's actually evolved quite a lot in the last few years, which has been really great to see. So previously, a manager would consider themselves ethical, even if they just had some basic exclusions. But exclusions are just the first step of responsible investing. And in terms of changing companies' behavior, they're actually a little counterproductive. So if a fund manager excludes a company, they're not able to engage with them on improving. So exclusions do have a place in investing, but they should only be used in areas that are actively harmful to the environment or to the community, areas where people just don't want to put their money, things like weapons, gambling, tobacco. So we've seen a shift to funds moving their total investments towards companies that are doing better. So companies that are reducing carbon, um, reducing their waste usage, treating their employees well. And these are all areas that we want to support. So this is great to see. Now, looking towards the future, what I see it holding is more standardization of information and transparency. This sounds dry, but the first step to doing better is knowing where you are at. So, right now, some funds do provide information on their sustainability characteristics, but it's tough to compare that information. Even those who report on carbon might do so using, say, a carbon footprint or a carbon intensity. You need to know what the benchmark they're comparing against, all these different things that make it tough to evaluate
Mhm.
apples to apples. So I mentioned some of the things that are helping is that climate related disclosure coming into effect next year, which will help this transparency going forward. But there is also a global focus on this increased transparency in general. So in the future, I do expect there to be global standardization of information, which of course the data nerd in me loves. And like I said, it does sound dry to say, I would like more information and reporting, but shining a light in dark areas is the only way to make true change. So I was at the Responsible Investment Conference last month, and there was an excellent session there on modern slavery. One of the presenters was an investigator looking for cases of modern slavery, and he spoke about how all of us in our daily lives benefit from slavery, whether that be the phones that we use to the seafood we eat. And right now, those supply chains are so opaque with subcontractors on subcontractors and patchy audit information. He was saying the only way to find and eliminate child labor and modern slavery is encouraging companies to monitor and address their supply chains. So really, this is why I strongly believe that more transparency is needed. And luckily, it seems to be happening to help draw attention to these issues and hopefully, use dollars for change because that's what you're looking for when you're investing responsibly.
Yeah, that's exciting that there's movement in their area, because there obviously have been quite a few scandals over the years about where some big brands have had, particularly with manufacturing, had their goods sourced and made. And often, sometimes they said, well, they're not our employees. We don't pay them. We just pay the business. And therefore, they kind of wash their hands of it a bit or try and put some distance. And it sounds like investors are holding them to account on where their goods and their services are coming from now.
Exactly. And just like people would boycott, not buying a company if they heard that the company was, cited for human rights abuses. For example, some people don't buy fast fashion because they know that's an industry that is rife in modern slavery. You can do the same with your investments and try and influence from that lens as well.
Mhm. And you mentioned that one of the advantages of investing in a company that might be more work in progress is that you can engage with them. Are there some examples of you can share where investors have been able to perhaps nudge a company in a better direction?
Yeah. So, um, in recent years, there's been a strong demand from investors to see the companies that they invest in manage the risk of and help to fight climate change. So many funds have incorporated this into their investment objectives in some way. So whether this be kind of excluding fossil fuels or investing in renewables or even targeting low emissions, there's many different ways a company can do it. Um, in New Zealand, we have seen electricity companies, for example, Mercury or Contact, make stronger commitments to decarbonizing than they had previously. So part of the reason for this is likely that they are taking, the companies are taking a principled approach to help mitigate climate change. But I would also say that a key driver is the opportunity to attract more investment from client-focused investors. And more investors leads to a higher share price and a higher remuneration for management. It's kind of a win-win there.
Okay, well, that's exciting that they can see I guess, the financial upside, if nothing else, to get them
Yeah.
to take action.
Yeah, and there's one other example of engagement that has been really interesting here in New Zealand, and that is with the company DGL controversy. So
Mhm.
they are a chemical company, and a few months ago, the CEO of this company called my food bag founder, Nadia Lim, some quite sexist and racist remarks. And it was really interesting to see the industry react and kind of the different ways to engage. So um, there were kind of two main tacks that investment companies took based on that. One was Kiwi Wealth, which just ruled it out. They weren't actually holding it at the time, but they said, we will not invest in this. This is not acceptable. Um, we're saying we will not invest in this company because of the remarks made by their CEO. The other was Milford, who did actually hold shares in the company. And so they went and talked to the board, said how these remarks affect the return of the company, affect people, and engaged with them to see if they could get change. And when they couldn't, they sold out of the company. What was interesting is the DGL recently, after that, delisted from the NZX, um, and that is attributed to this engagement and this backlash from the investment industry.
Okay. Well, it's good to know that in some cases it can make a difference. And we've covered a couple of different types of, I guess, causes, like whether that be climate change or gender diversity or supply chain, etc. Do most funds look at all the different factors, or are there specialist funds? How are because when it comes to doing good, there are a lot of areas and a lot of companies that play in this space. So in terms of the lay of the land, most of the time, are you investing in a fund manager that's doing broad strokes across a number of issues, or more narrowly into one issue?
Yeah, so how we look at it is a core and satellite approach. So at the core of investment portfolios, our framework that we look for is that when we're evaluating fund managers, is first of all, are they excluding harmful industries? Do they invest in companies with best in class environmental and social scores? Do they have a low carbon target? Like I said, this is a big, big issue. And so I think it's worth calling out specifically. And then finally, do they engage with companies to affect change by using those voting rights that they get? And I think that those core positions do still need to be broadly diversified. You want to be investing in many different industries so that you can use that engagement vote.
Mhm.
The areas where you might want to invest a little more targetedly, we would say make them they could be a smaller percentage of your portfolio, and that might be a satellite holding. So for example, there are ETFs that specifically look at um, green energy, clean energy.
Mhm.
They look at property companies, supporting property companies that are doing well. There's electronic vehicle funds. All of those are good ways to invest in specific issues. Now, the things to consider when looking at those is the investment characteristics as well. So I think you want to balance the environmental considerations with the investment. So those more targeted funds are investing in one industry. They might be potentially in one country. So maybe they're more volatile, and that might be fine. But you want to understand what you're investing in before you put your money there.
Okay. And where's a good place to start if people want to learn more and get a bit more upskill on this topic? What are your go-to resources?
Yeah, so mindful money, they're just the best. I think, it can't be beat here in New Zealand. They have some really good seminars. They have really good information. And of course, they've got information, the most comprehensive information on what individual funds invest in. Um, I would say otherwise, the places to look are in the news. So John Barry from Pathfinder, he writes a great column in Stuff. You also can kind of see what the different fund managers are releasing. We release content regularly on this, but there isn't necessarily a central place other than mindful money. And so it's about kind of looking at what information you need to know to invest, and kind of staying up to date by, generally just checking the news and seeing what's available.
Okay. And you touched on the fact that an advisor can help you through this process. I think for a lot of our audience, they haven't engaged with advisors before. So perhaps you could share a bit more light on what that process looks like and why someone might want to go with an advisor.
Yeah, so how it usually works is, let's just say someone's contacted us via our website, someone I didn't know in the past. We might have an introductory Teams call to make sure that I'm the right fit for them and vice versa. Um, and from there, we have what we call a discovery meeting. It's essentially where you dive in and ask a bunch of questions, I find out what you are looking for from your investments, what you want your life to look like, and how your money can support that. The other benefit of that is getting organized. A lot of people don't necessarily have a clear understanding of where their money is. And so I think that is also a underrated part of the process, is just getting a list of what are your assets and liabilities, where is everything, what KiwiSaver are you in? There are quite a few people who don't know what KiwiSaver provider and fund, how much they're contributing. All of these things are important to know when you're trying to, invest for your future or for your children's future. Um, and then from there, we put it all together into a plan. And so we make recommendations, whether that be depending on what the client's looking um, for us to manage on an ongoing basis, or for the client to manage it themselves. Say, invest on this platform. Here's how you monitor it on an ongoing basis. Both of those options. But I think the people who might want an advisor are those who want to outsource. They are time poor and they don't necessarily, this isn't an area of expertise, this isn't an area of interest. And this is my area of interest. I love this stuff. I've loved it since I was a teenager. I was like the little nerdy kid reading an investing book and going, oh my goodness, compound interest sounds amazing. And so I think it's like the people who would benefit from it are those who have no inclination to do it themselves, because it is complicated. There are some key tenets for people who can do it, want to do it themselves, that we can help with. But I think it's figuring out realistically how much you want to do, and then kind of going from there.
Okay. And do you see new parents as part of your clientele? Is that a trigger for people to kind of get on top of their finances?
100%, yes. So we get people in who have had a new baby, they're maybe on maternity leave, and so they want to make sure that while they've got this new little munchkin, that maybe they're setting up an investment fund for them. Or something I hear from a few clients is they want to have a big life, they want to be able to go on trips, and they want to be able to you know help their child with university. Um, and so investing is maybe something they've thought about for a while, but that is 100% like a Kickstarter to kind of get going.
Okay. And is there particular or broad base recommendations or advice you can give to parents? I know that financial advice is often for each situation, but perhaps common situations that you see for parents and how they present. Are there things that parents should be thinking about early or getting on top of early?
Yeah, I would say um, thinking, I guess, first of all, considering your own financial situation. Like, I know this is slightly controversial, but if you have no retirement savings and are maybe not, don't have your own financial situation in order, that needs to come first. Like, yes, you may want to help your child with university or their first home deposit, and that is fantastic. But the first step to that is making sure you have solid feet under yourself, because you don't want to get in a situation where you've helped your kid, but then you have to work much later than you need to, or are, worrying about money. There's student loans available, there's things that are available that can help your children down the line. So get yourself sorted first. The next step is maybe, and something we see kind of in general, people don't have specific goals. They have, I might like to do this, but I don't know exactly when. And that's okay. I think that's part of this analysis paralysis and just getting started piece, is the fact that, like, your goals will evolve as you grow, as your children grow. And the best thing you can do is kind of kick things off and figure out what direction you want to go. Um, and then start, what's the next smallest step you can take to get there? What's the next smallest thing you can do to get moving in the right direction?
Okay. And my last question for you is, we've talked about um, responsible and ethical considerations when selecting a fund. What else should parents be looking at? And I know that's something you and I have talked about, and there is an article on the Crayon website, but I think it's good to know at a high level, aside, if you pull up a fund that aligns with your values, what else should you be checking before you hand your money over?
Yeah, so I guess first of all, knowing your own tolerance for risk and knowing your time frame, those are two really important things. The thing that is going to be the most detrimental to you is if you invest in a fund that has, let's say you invest in a growth fund, but you're looking to buy a house in the next 2 years, those two things are mismatched. If the fund goes down, then you might not have the money there that you might have expected to have for a house. And that can be a really tough situation. I saw that during COVID, where people just invested in a growth fund, didn't reduce it as they got down to actually buying a house. They'd put, you know, they'd come under contract for a house. The market went down. They were 15K low on their deposit and had to loan some money from, family. So that's a situation, you want to avoid. The other things to look at in terms of the provider are, what are their fees? What do they invest in? So, of course, responsible investment fits in that, but also, are they broadly diversified? Are they concentrated? What do you prefer when looking at your investments? Um, and then finally, kind of, what kind of extras do they offer? Is there anything that's really important to you in terms of the service level that they might be able to offer? Some managers offer kind of more information than others. They might have an app, they might have quite a helpful service department. And so those are other kind of the tangential things that you can look at.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful knowledge with us. I know it is something a lot of people want to do. In fact, some recent statistics I saw showed that almost the same amount of money is flowing into ethical and responsible investing as it is into traditional investing. So it clearly is something that's on people's radar and they want to do it well. So thank you so much for sharing all that with us.